Hi, guys, and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast, where life is story. I would like to encourage y'all, to subscribe or follow us, either on Buzzsprout or whatever platform you use to listen to podcasts, but also YouTube. We have some really great supplemental content on YouTube, so do not shy away from that. That said, I would like to introduce our, I almost said extraordinary producer, our producer extraordinaire, who we're calling the anniversary lady this week.
Yes.
You've had a milestone, Virginia Grenier.
Yes, milestone. I've not taken my husband out into the desert and offed him yet after 21 years of marriage.
Woo!
That's a milestone, right?
Right. That should be a national holiday, right?
Yes.
I didn't bludgeon my spouse day. Yeah.
Yes, my spouse is still with me. No. It's been a good run. It's 25 years total, 21 years of actual marriage. So yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Well, and we'll talk about your nails next week. That'll be your next, or 2 weeks from now.
Yes.
Anyway, thank you for being here. And without further ado, I'm going to read today's guest's bio. I will preface it by saying he's a very dear friend. We are both looking forward to catching up in cyberspace with the listenership. This is my favorite kind of episode where I just adore the person and we get to really catch up because it's been a while. I mean, it wasn't just the pandemic. I think and that is a bit of a preface as well. I'm so nostalgic about the early 90s, not just my youth, not just my glory days, but this sort of cultural shift that made me who I am. And I'm going to pick his brain about that. Maybe I imagined it all. We don't know. But I'm kind of looking forward for that reason. He is a big, huge influence on my trajectory as a storyteller, an artist, a creative, and a human being. And that's not an exaggeration. Okay, after graduating Art Center College of Design, Pasadena, California, in 1982, I moved to New York City and began illustrating for America's most prominent publishers of books, magazines, and newspapers. I'm going to add, and my memory is it was literally like Sports Illustrated, Time Magazine, Playboy, all the big ones. 2 decades later, I worked as a concept designer on feature CG animated and live action films such as The Ant Bully, The Golden Compass, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and Escape from Planet Earth. I consider myself a cross-disciplinary artist and love to work in different mediums, from high touch to high tech. I love that phrase. Paint to pixels, photography to film, books to music. I founded the educational service, Artist as Brand, to inspire and nurture art career sustainability. Living in Santa Fe, New Mexico with wife, artist, botanical perfumer, Roxana Villa, I don't know, of illuminated perfume keeps me in tune with my essential nature and is always a creative adventure. Welcome, Greg Spalenka.
Hello. Pleasure and honor and fun to be here with you to catch up and talk about all sorts of fun things.
Woo! I look forward to it. Did I get anything wrong in the bio? Is it Villa or Villa?
Villa that works. Yeah, Roxana Villa. That is correct.
Well, let me start by saying I envy you for living in Santa Fe from all I hear. I think I've been through there, but I haven't really spent time there. But my sister literally just says it's magical. It's right. The energy. Is that an exaggeration?
No, that is very true, actually. That gets, we talk about story. This is all about stories. The story of leaving Los Angeles, after being there for decades, and coming to Santa Fe was quite a bit. It was a gigantic move for me. Roxana, well, this kind of goes back. I guess I'll go back just briefly. LA was turning into a bit of a slog. And so we decided to sell the house and then move to Santa Fe. Well, move somewhere else. And Roxana, really felt like Santa Fe was going to be a great place. So I like to say I followed the goddess to Santa Fe. And with that, there was a lot of learning. There's still some adjustment. We've been here about 6 years now, which is hard to believe that it's been that much time already. But I will say that there is a magic in the land here. There's this quality of the indigenous cultures. There is also this quality of the earth and the sky. I was really missing the ocean, in California and LA, big time. But I realize here now that the sky is the ocean.
I love that.
It's truly magnificent. And so the energies are different. Santa Fe unto itself is very much an art town. It's full of healers. And once you start diving into like the history of New Mexico, and there's a lot of atrocities and a lot of suffering here that went down, way back to, even before the Spaniards came and before the white man came. There was lots of difficulty even between tribes, but then a lot of just sort of I want to say what's the word, like a kind of there were violent episodes here, and this is why I bring this up, is because it's surprising that the town itself is such a peaceful and more of a nurturing place. So it's like somehow the earth somehow like just soaked all that up,
right?
And then blasted.
Well, let me ask you a question then, because I had about 12 things I wanted to say throughout.
Yes.
So much, it's so loaded.
Okay.
I guess, no, I'll take that opportunity. I just want to ask, for example, I was born in 1968. And I share that birthday with a very dear friend, the mother of my godson. So every year we give, not every year, but often we give one another cards like, here's what happened in 1968. And you'll see Time magazine covers about, the DNC, the DNC protests, which were really significant. Martin Luther King was assassinated that year, RFK, right? Yeah, Robert, not John, was assassinated that year. A lot of strife, a lot of upheaval, but obviously strife signals change. So there was a lot of growth, and then the next year was Woodstock and the moon landing. So like I use that as an illustration, like our human potential came out of that strife in a way. So anyway, maybe that's going on there where all that character resulted from the strife. I didn't know about was it the Pueblo Indians or what tribes are we talking about?
Well, they have they have lots of different tribes in this area. That's what's fascinating. So what I'd say one of my biggest lessons from living here is that I didn't realize how ignorant I was about indigenous culture, and that their history is written in the books by the victors, if you want to say it that much. So they've been marginalized tremendously. I mean, throughout the United States and a lot of parts of the world, of course, too. But it is amazing to feel and to experience a sense of the this healing power of the land here. And when I say that's when I say in the earth and the sky, there is this connection between heaven and earth.
Oh, beautiful.
And so there is this quality. It's tangible and intangible, but I can say at the end of the day, it's just so much more relaxing here and peaceful. And people come, and I'll say this much too, that I do really feel that it recalibrated my nervous system. And it took a few months after being here to sort of settle in. And with that, it was like, I realized it was like, oh my God, I'd been living in, urban culture.
You get habituated. You get habituated to it, right? And chronic anxiety becomes the norm.
Exactly. And it was like I was dumbing down my nervous system, but you don't know it because
sorry, I have to interject because I am the guy who notices it. And, I grew up, this is something I wanted to say a moment ago, like the desert is in my blood. I come from a line of miners, prospectors, geologists, and we spent my whole childhood was spent in the desert. And actually, that's why I love Virginia's state of Utah, because it's gorgeous, right? Fuck the Grand Canyon, go to Zion, go to Bryce. It's a beauty. Strawberry Reservoir. And so I'm sure, New Mexico is the same way. It's so beautiful to look at. But I guess I was just going to say, like, I'll sit on the the patio at my favorite coffee shop, and nobody else
Well, it's interesting.
nobody notices the
Yeah.
jackhammer, and then the car alarms,
Exactly.
and it drives me batty. But I think it says a lot that nobody even, it doesn't register at all. And so, yes, I am right behind you. I'll be in Santa
Yeah.
Fe momentarily.
Yes, please come visit. But yes, we do what we need to do to survive. And
Mhm.
it's just unfortunate that the urban culture it doesn't have more balance in that regard. I mean, it is fascinating now if I go back to visit Los Angeles.
Mhm.
The driving on the freeways there, it's like, what is going, I
God,
know,
no,
six
God did not
lanes.
intend it. Yeah.
Yeah, 6 lanes this way, 6 lanes the other way,
Right.
and it's like, millions of cars spewing out.
Mhm.
The energy is ridiculous, and I'm just thinking, oh my God, world out of balance. What was
Mhm.
I thinking? And then you got,
Kayana Do you remember, speaking of the early 90s, do you remember
oh
Scotsy?
yeah,
I think that's
yeah,
the
exactly.
tagline
That's
of that
it.
film, World Out of something like that.
Oh, well, that's
Mhm.
it. And then and then what's really tragic is then you have, millions and millions of people that have had their nervous systems,
Mhm.
I want to say dumbed down, or
Mhm.
they numbed out,
Mhm.
right? And they're sort of living part lives because they are
Mhm.
not able to, when you're back in nature, it really calibrates your system. I mean, all the
Of
senses,
course.
and it's like your radar is expanded. It's like
Mhm.
your perception gets expanded
Mhm.
outward,
Of course.
outward toward infinity.
Well, I
And
think you mentioned the sky. Like when you're in the city and your buildings are literally blocking your view of the sky. When you
yes,
get out and you see either the Milky Way from fucking horizon to
oh,
horizon, right? Or you
huge.
see this one cloud stacked upon the next to eternity, you do expand, right? And you ponder. It's set up that way. You're supposed to ponder the cosmos when you can see them.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Was it?
There's a great story with the earthquake. I think it was in '95.
Oh, yes.
The LA earthquake.
Yes, dude.
And remember, it was all that devastation. I think it was in '95, and all that devastation throughout the valley. And what it
Mhm.
did is, if you recall,
Every
it
light went
not
out.
yeah,
Every
it
light went
knocked
out.
out all those transformers,
Mhm.
and there were people calling in to the police departments and saying something has happened to the sky. Something has happened to the sky. What's it? Like the Earth is ending. It's like
Right.
because they could see the stars for the
Right.
first time.
Right.
And
Dude,
then there's
I have told that story many times. I had two male roommates and we were all standing in the doorway in our underwear. That's just for the visual of it. And yeah, the transformers blow. Every dog in the valley was barking, right? But the stunning thing that they didn't recognize was the Milky Way. Nobody was used to seeing
exactly.
it. Yeah.
And
What
what's
is
tragic,
that?
yeah, and but so ultimately at the end of the day, what's really tragic is that you have then like kids that grow up in that environment, never even seeing the sky. I know
Mhm.
that I forget what organization is that takes kids from the inner city there in LA and takes them to the beach. Some of those
Mhm.
people don't even know that
Mhm.
there's an ocean.
Yep.
I mean, so
Scary.
the simple healing powers of
Mhm.
nature, they've definitely they've recalibrated me,
Mhm.
and it's amazing. Like right now, so we live in this place which is it's called the Royal Hondo, which is about 15 minutes away from downtown Santa Fe. And it's funny I say downtown because it's, it's like a town. It is like a town. It's not a
Mm.
city. It's a city. It's like a small city, but it feels very human, I guess you could
Mhm.
say. But so we live outside the city, about 15-minute drive, and it's just so quiet. It's so
Remember
quiet.
that? Remember
You know,
silence? Yeah. No,
yes, exactly. Silence. And so
Mhm.
I go outside, I do my naked yoga out there.
Good for you.
Not when it's snowing, but
Right.
so that I would have to say that probably one of the more difficult parts for me is snow and
Mm.
winter. I mean, I'm a California
Oh yeah,
boy in a way, and even though
through and through. Yeah, yeah.
I lived in New York, for those 8 years,
Mhm.
but I've not really been my body type likes warm and hot,
Mm.
And so when it comes to the cold, it's like here, it's like almost, it feels like it's 6 months of winter. It's like,
How
please.
I will throw this in the mix though. Like I've said, when it's hot, you can only take so many clothes. You can't take your skin off. But when it's cold, you can bundle up. So I
Yeah.
actually prefer cold to extremely, especially muggy, right? Because you
Okay.
can bundle up, but you can't take your skin off.
Yep.
From
Okay.
what I know.
I mean, I see your point, but at the same day, maybe I'd probably be I'd like to be just native then. Native. I'll go native.
I
To
want to
handle the
back
heat.
up a little bit just because it is actually very much in the spirit of this podcast. Like I do think we're starved for silence, right? So, I mean, Rilke, you might have even assigned that to me, but Rilke, Letters to a Young Poet, says, all true inspiration comes from solitude. So I would agree,
Beautiful.
as an artist, it's like we thrive on figurative silence, not literal, right? Silence. And Eckhart Tolle, have you ever read The Power of Now?
I haven't read that, but I'm very familiar with him and a lot of his
Yeah, just kind of like being in the moment.
philosophy.
Yeah,
Yes.
so I actually, just hear me out on this one. When I'm president, the first thing I'm going to do away with,
Excellent.
yeah, the first thing I'll do away with is noise pollution. And then second is literally visual pollution. LA is the only city really with above ground power lines, above ground telephone lines, and it's visual pollution. So now in my head, I'm imagining someone saying, yeah, but that's really not a priority when you've got this social ill and that one and all these wars waging. And I very seriously would say, but how about if there was less mental illness in the first place, then we wouldn't have all this strife. So if we cared about aesthetics, if we cared about silence, and we cared about, aesthetics, meaning get rid of the visual pollution, probably less aggression across the board, less chronic anxiety, less PTSD, and less wars. And I'm not kidding.
Absolutely. Well, there's something to be said about once again, it's an inside out job, right? Ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
that ultimately at the end of the day, right, it really is about the peace within you and finding what that is, and know thyself, and
Mm-hmm.
connecting to the deeper source of who we are. And the one beautiful part about being in nature is that it allows some semblance of that. That even if you're in the mountains and it's wind,
Mm-hmm.
like here, what is another aspect of this area, which is really powerful, is you do have the desert. Yeah, it's that all the different facets of the desert. But then you also have the mountains. We're here, they have the Segria de Cristo mountains where they got ski slopes and everything. And you go up there and it's a totally different environment.
Mm-hmm.
But whether you're in the desert and you're meditating, or if you're praying, or you're using that as a means of connecting yourself, to the earth,
Mm-hmm.
to the universe, to those powerful aspects that are throughout all of nature, whether it's in the desert or in the mountains. In the mountains, you're up there and you get the wind coming through the trees, and it's just like, oh my God, it's like the whispering of the ancestors throughout the
Mm-hmm.
ages. It's so powerful, but
Mm-hmm.
you know,
But
it
I get
just
it.
centers you up.
There's a different outcome when you're in the mountains than I think of the desert as very sterile and very cleansing spiritually, right? But then in the mountains, it's almost like that lack of oxygen transports you somewhere else. To
Well,
agree with,
I feel that you get it. You both places complement
yeah, but I thought you were
as
hinting that
spiritual.
there's a slightly different
Oh yeah, well, the
effect.
fact that you have in this area, you have differences in the
Mm-hmm.
environment, the actual physical environment. But the point being ultimately is that it is the nature of things, and in urban
Mm-hmm.
environments, that's stripped out.
Of course,
I
yes.
mean, what do they plant? They plant. I mean, it's essentially it's a concrete jungle, right? In
Right,
New
right.
York, L.A., any of the
Mm-hmm.
urban places.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, let's stick a little park over here, with some
Yeah.
green grass. It's like, I mean, what? That's not.
Well, I lived in Manhattan. You lived in Manhattan. I
Oh
remember
yeah.
going deep, deep, deep in the Ramble. That really wooded part of Central Park. I went there with my sketchbook, and I'm like, I'm gonna go as deep. I never lost sight of a human being, not once. So I
Oh,
go
you
to
mean it?
Brooklyn for some peace and quiet. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I was going to say maybe a little, yeah, in the context of what peace and quiet would be in an urban environment, right? But for the most part, You're not
Well, I
going to
do
get
think
it.
Central Park is really beautiful. I love Central Park,
Oh
but I
yeah.
never lost sight of a human.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's part of it. And you still will get the noise, like you said, the noise
Oh yeah,
pollution will
yeah.
be there. And then also just the energy
Mhm.
of the place. There is, they call it the city that never sleeps, right?
Mm.
Or
I say the
Is
pigeons
that
are even
Paris?
on crack. The pigeons are even in a hurry. Yes.
It's really the truth, and thank God they designed that park into that city. Can
Mm.
you imagine if they didn't have that?
Yep.
Talk about a sprawling metropolis. I mean,
Mm.
that would be you'd have probably a lot more psychosis there than you do now.
Right.
Um, but in
Right.
either case, the yes, having nature I find is crucial, and even in an environment like if you're in the city, in LA, if you have even a small backyard, you can create that for yourself too. But
But it's the energy, like you said. It's still,
yeah, the
it's all
energy is
pervasive. Yeah.
yes, I just there all the time.
You know, to agree with something you said a moment ago, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but obviously we're meant. And Virginia often says, "What? Not get your hands on the earth, but what is it you do? Touch grass."
Yeah, I go touch grass, and it's
Right.
funny because I've been listening to Greg the whole time as he's talking. Not to stir away from me for a second, Dominic, but I mean, because I'm a native born California, out of LA girl myself. Even though I've lived
Okay, I
from
got it.
yeah, even though I lived from Central down, but I moved here about 18 years ago. I followed my husband for his career, and it was actually between New Mexico because my family is out of New Mexico,
Oh,
is where they
wow,
come from,
great.
and literally that location in Roswell, or it was here in St.
Huh.
George. But it took me a while to acclimate to it. But once I did, even my spiritualism changed.
Mm.
Like that was the starting point of like the switch flip for me, and
Mm.
rehoning
You
myself
do know she lives
spiritually.
in St. George, Utah, right? Greg, did you guys cover that?
Oh no, I
No,
know you. Oh, so you live there now. Oh well,
I live
Utah
there
is.
now.
Oh well,
Yeah,
Utah is. Well,
Well,
this.
St. George
yeah,
I'm guessing it's similar to Santa Fe. The rock
it
formations, it's just
is.
all those iron oxide stained
It is,
formations. And
and I do when I need to rehone myself, I will go out barefoot, and I always say go touch grass, but it's
Yeah, that's
I
it.
yeah,
Mhm.
but it's literally getting my feet into the natural soil and
Yes,
Yeah, well,
Earth.
the anecdote I was going to tell, the reason I brought that up is it's back to something Greg said a minute ago. I have a very dear friend, Diane, and again, this all my stories are coming from the early '90s for some reason, but she had
Oh,
just divorced, so there was a lot of processing going on, and for some reason, we took a trip to Yosemite, and she literally just the tears streamed. It wasn't even attached
mm,
to a thought, but it is so cleansing, right, that the
Mhm.
toxins just surface.
yeah,
And
they
yeah, it
come
was
out.
really
Yeah.
beautiful. It was it was beautiful to watch her cry. Yeah.
Oh, that's sweet. And so you mentioned touching grass. There's the concept of earthing, which I'm
Mm.
sure you're both. Are you familiar with earthing?
I am.
Yes,
Not
both.
so much. I've heard some Japanese traditions about getting back to nature and hugging trees, that sort of thing. What is
No,
earthing
well,
exactly?
earthing is all about essentially being barefoot, having your bare feet grounding on to the earth, so
Hmm.
that there is this human resonance. There is a resonance and a vibration
Hmm.
and energy that comes. The earth is always producing this,
Hmm.
and when we wear shoes, especially if they're rubber soles,
Hmm.
excuse me, they insulate you from that vibration. And
Hmm.
so it's important if you can do it, that you can even, that you're somehow connected at least a part of the day to the planet that way. There's a
Beautiful.
lot of health benefits to it.
Hmm.
And it's, once again, it's about being human.
I was
You
going to
know,
say, my brother and I must have known that as ragamuffins in Burbank because we would develop pads on our feet
oh,
from
yeah,
literally never wearing shoes, but we were also white
absolutely.
trash. Nobody recognized it as earthing, and we were before our time, clearly, because
Oh yeah, no, remember. Well, even the concept of summer vacations. I don't even know if
right,
I don't even know if kids have that anymore. They have
right.
they have that system all set up now where it's in blocks of time, and so like the idea that you're going to take 3 months off like we did,
Hmm.
which was amazing, right? And
Hmm.
it's like, and I never forget that when you would start summer vacation, one of the first things was to start to go barefoot again.
Right.
Oh,
Hmm.
it was always in those first 2 weeks or so, it was like a little,
Right.
the ow, 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 ow. And
Right,
then
right, right. And then
slowly, like I said, you build up the calluses, and then you're like running around like a banshee.
Right. Much to our mother's chagrin. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh no. But that was also what was amazing too. I'm getting off topic here a little bit, but the idea that I grew up. So I grew up in Arcadia, California. I grew up in a large Catholic family.
Mhm.
Three boys, three girls. We were just like the Brady Bunch. I was the oldest, Greg, right? But we were nothing like the Brady Bunch.
Did you
Nothing.
have beads did you have a bead curtain for your bedroom like Greg Brady had?
Oh no!
Remember
Oh
that?
yeah! No! No!
That was
No! No!
groovy. That was
No!
so
Like I said,
groovy.
that was the only. I mean, and my parents weren't divorced; they were together. But the point is, we were similar, but we had nothing to do with them because it was like barely controlled chaos.
Mm,
It just always was just insanity all the time with all these kids. We were all born one after another.
mm. Yeah, my mom
Um,
had four kids in 5 years.
Oh my God. Oh, there you go. Well, I think,
Mhm.
I don't know if that was the trend at the time or what, but, so hence the neighborhood and especially, that time in the 60s, I was born in 58. So 60s.
Wow, you're
But,
exactly 10 years older. I was wondering about that. You're exactly
ah,
10 years older. Okay.
but yeah, so the neighborhood was full of kids. So, summer vacation came and my mom was just like, get out of the house. And
Exactly. Don't come
that's,
home till nightfall, right?
and that's exactly what we would do. You would just disappear. And,
Right.
and everybody's obsessed with paying attention to every single
Well, they
minute
have
of their
ankle bracelets,
kids.
don't they?
Oh my God.
They put chips in their heads now, I
Oh,
think.
it's friggin' insane. I know, right? Whereas for us, it was like for free, and we disappear, and it's like you make sure you're back here for dinner,
Right. Exactly. Right.
that type of thing. It was remarkable times, and we were, you playing sports and doing things and falling out of trees and
And drinking from the garden hose. And
oh yeah,
I even
all of it, and I think there was something really beautiful about that freedom, and it gave us a certain amount of courage.
Well, how about
And
imagination? To get back to creativity. Like actually, it
absolutely,
births imagination. Whereas
absolutely,
even the Legos got to the point where it's like you don't even need to build it. You've got the car seat. You've got the Empire State Building. Right? There's no inventing going on.
yeah. I mean, it's in either case, there was a certain amount of freedom.
Yep.
I think that was there, which you just don't see. Everybody's obsessed with like protecting their kids, and
Exactly.
it's like that. I don't know what's up with all of it, other than maybe society's gotten a little crazier. But yes, the creativity. We were always making up our own games
Hmm.
all the time, and just playing. And then for me, the art early on was there, and just another. If you want to pull me out of the conversation, just let me know. But I'm kind of going off here. But
Go.
this all sort of will make sense too. So I grew up in the big family, but we were Catholic too, right?
Hmm.
And so it was interesting with that. And my parents were hardcore Catholics, and it's like church every Sunday and getting everybody dressed, and it was that unto itself, herding cats into church every Sunday was a bit insane. And it was interesting. I mean, for a while there, I thought, I was an altar boy. I was in a Catholic school for like my first 2 years, first and second grade, and I thought, could I become a priest? There was a spiritual part of me, right? Um, but as much as I mean, I wasn't so much into what the church was about, right? What I loved is where the church that we were at there was this beautiful, almost not a cathedral, but it had all the stained glass. The art in the church is what I loved. The candles. There was like all the facets of the architecture, the stained glass, the candles, the incense, even the robes. There was this like fantastical
Hmm.
facet to it,
Hmm.
the robes, you might call them costumes. It's like this big piece of theater.
Yep.
Mhm.
And I love that. I
Hmm.
absolutely love that part. But I mean, inside myself, I knew there was always something else going on,
Well,
beyond all that.
yeah, I
There
think
was an intuition
I was
that
going
was
to say,
telling
you
me,
know, I had my time of course, in our 20s in college. You probably all of us went through our institutionalized religion bashing a little bit, but I did come full circle and I thought, you know, yes, the word has been corrupted in a lot of ways, but there were earnest intentions here and there. When you
oh,
go,
yeah,
yeah, when you go to the Vatican, what's it called? The
yeah. Wait a minute, Rome?
yeah, the
Oh, St. Peter's Cathedral? What?
yeah, like any abbey, any Catholic abbey, you're like, wow, this space was designed to transport you. And you can see how, you know what I mean? It
Absolutely.
elevates you to a spiritual place. Yeah.
Absolutely. So long story short with that is that I always knew inside me, I like to say that I had this interior cathedral inside of my
Mm,
spirit, inside of my brain and my heart. And I knew there was always something else going on. And I was always having these other kind of mystical
mm,
experiences that would just let me know that there was something going on beyond the Catholic Church. And
mm,
so it was, and so I've through my life I've had that journey of seeking and trying to
mm,
understand more deeply what is really truly going on. And it says, and now my path is more in the context of meditation,
mm,
um, deep meditation. But but what I have been able to understand, I mean, I'm a fervent believer in reincarnation. I'm positive I was a monk in many past lifetimes. And I think this gravitation toward grand structures like
mm,
cathedrals, beautiful churches, I guess you could say art that is designed around this concept of creating spirit in physical form, whether
mm.
it's a building, whether it's a statue, whether
It's
it's
like incarnating, right? It's incarnating the spiritual, the
exactly,
metaphysical.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, exactly, yeah. You're making physical the spiritual,
Mhm. Well, Ayn
whether it,
Rand calls it bringing the conceptual realm into the perceptual realm, right? What you do as an image maker, and I want to get to that, you know, the conceptual
yes,
process of creating images, you are creating percepts out of concepts.
absolutely. It's like you're creating. This is what's so amazing about art, and artists
Hmm.
and people that you're creating something out of nothing in some
Hmm.
respects, right? It's mind stuff. It's you want to call it mind stuff, spiritual stuff. Somehow, however you can connect to source, you have all that
Hmm.
ancestral DNA. You have the physical being of who you are, your brain, um, and of course, depending on how you want to look at it from a very just the makeup of the human body, or if you connect it into the spirit, you realize that there are these channels of information, and however you can pull that through, and
Hmm.
then with a pencil,
Hmm.
then be able to actually sketch or draw or create something out of nothing.
Hmm.
These ideas and these concepts, and then inspire the world. In
Beautiful.
so many different ways. It's like we're all like little gods and goddesses, right?
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, we're conduits, you know. I mean, I agree with you. You know, a lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea that we have divinity in us, or, you know, God has to be separate and he's got to be on a cloud with a white beard. And it's like, actually, we're extensions of collective consciousness, right? And I agree with you
Yes.
that we're all little antennas and conduits for whatever you want to call it, that
Yes.
universal intelligence, that wisdom. But I do want to, I think for our listeners, I want to back up a little bit because this is beautiful stuff, but I want to give it some context. So I have a question for you. Again, you are an image maker, and I'd love for you to talk about your process, like you're saying, of I don't want to put words in your mouth, but sort of being inspired and then sort of executing that, meaning bringing it into the perceptual realm, right? But there's something I want to kind of define for our listeners. And tell me if I'm wrong, but again, and I am so nostalgic about the early 90s when I met you and I was in your class, and it seemed like editorial conceptual illustration was a rather new phenomenon, right? I believe you and Erisman and Mahurin and the Brat Pack, right, of conceptual editorial illustrators kind of maybe brought a more fine art sensibility to print illustration. But I know now that's really not anyone's radar. I have some quotes from you actually where you kind of opened some people's eyes that actually images can be conceptual. It's like it's not even on their radar. So am I wrong about what I just said? And then if not, what is conceptual art versus narrative? Do you parse between
Mm.
conceptual and strictly narrative?
That's an interesting question.
That's what I paid to learn at Art Center. In my recollection, I paid to learn how to think
Well,
and conceptually.
if yes, well, if you just look at the history of art, right? If you go back to even to like the earliest cave paintings, where they were just putting their handprints, or they were
Mhm,
somehow creating representations of bison or
mhm,
animals, people hunting.
mhm.
If you go all the way back to then, in some respects, it's like they were trying to capture a moment, a narrative in a way, but at the same time, there's also the belief that they were attempting to capture the spirit
Mhm.
of that
Through
moment.
symbology almost, or these were
Yes,
symbols of animals, really. Mhm,
exactly. And so it's like that was sort of a little bit of both. And as you go through the
mhm,
history, you can go, you can say throughout all of history, if you can just imagine everything from Middle Ages to Renaissance to more modern
mhm,
culture, turn of the century, where things became much more representational.
mhm.
And then, of course, you moved into like modern art, more abstractions. And then in the
And
commercial
yet,
world,
it wasn't abstraction there from the get go as well. Those hands, right?
yes, yeah,
Maybe
well,
they were
yeah.
just showing off for the women of the tribe, like, hey, I can blow air through this straw and create an imprint of my hand. Maybe it was just to get
Yeah.
chicks, right? But it seems like a
I know.
representation of
I know it's
humanity.
true.
Well, who
That's
knows?
funny.
But I think there was abstraction from the very beginning, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure, sure. You can. I mean, even just by putting paint on a canvas, whether it's representational or not. I
Mhm.
mean, this is interesting. An interesting thought. So there's this amazing book called "The Alphabet versus the Goddess" by Dr. Leonard Schlein.
I know.
Created-
Yeah,
Are you
Schlane. My
familiar with that
sister.
book?
Oh, my sister worships him.
Oh
Yes.
my God! He's amazing. That book is a masterpiece. But he
Tell me the
talks.
title one more time, just for my sister.
It's called "The Alphabet versus the Goddess"
Okay.
by Dr. Leonard Schlein.
Right.
Schlein.
Yeah.
And I bring it up because he talks about how literacy, when literacy was brought into any culture throughout the world, through his research, there was created tremendous chaos
Mm,
and craziness and misogyny, and
mm,
women's rights were just diminished and destroyed. And it's because it went from generally cultures went from a predominantly right brain
yes. 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 Yes.
usage to a left brain. It
Hmm.
switched it over, or there was more of a
Was that the
balance.
end of matriarchy? Is that when patriarchy took hold,
Yeah,
basically?
well, that's what this is his theory, and it makes a lot of sense
Hmm.
that the literacy through the alphabet and through the strings and lines of type,
Hmm.
that it moved it to the left brain side, which is more abstract thinking, and whereas with the right side of the brain is more oral.
Hmm.
Audio, you're through speaking and memory. It's a totally different paradigm.
Hmm.
Um, but he talks. This is the part I was wanting to bring up. He said that until you had literacy, he
Hmm.
goes, perspective in art actually came about on a flat
Hmm.
surface,
Hmm.
right? The idea of the concept of perspective
Right.
in
Right.
painting, drawing, was pretty much you didn't see that
Hmm.
until when literacy became more predominant. Then this concept of perspective was also in line with that. And he said that cultures that were not literate, when they would look at a piece like a painting or a drawing
Hmm.
that had perspective, they couldn't see it.
Hmm.
They couldn't see.
That
They didn't couldn't
Yeah, that reminds me
understand
a
the
little bit
perspective.
of, from what I understand, like Eastern art was very graphic through many dynasties, right? And
Yes,
when they
and so,
saw the chiaroscuro shading, we call it, on a figure, they thought it was dirt on the faces.
but
And
what's
then
fan? Yeah,
there's
go ahead. I'm
tribes
sorry. Go
of
ahead.
pygmies that literally couldn't see the forest for the trees because they were always surrounded by trees. And when they
Exactly.
were brought
Yes.
out to a plain, they called the buffaloes ants, right? Because they had no concept of, yeah.
Exactly. So but he was saying that it was the left brain through that the left brain was able to understand the perspective that more robust left brain through literacy that they could then understand perspective in a painting.
Right.
Whereas if you didn't have that, then it was harder for them to see it. It was just
And
like
the
you said,
implications of that seem enormous. Are you saying that's when conceptual thinking came about, or conceptual image making? What was the big
no, I'm not.
shift?
I think it's just more in the context of, um, well, that would be maybe kind of connected to it.
Because
Um,
language is symbolism, right? It is just symbolism, and it's a very figurative, imperfect science, right?
well, you're
Words
taking a
are symbols for
yes,
percepts,
and then you string them together to create a sentence, and then the
right?
sentences create paragraphs, and then onward.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess ultimately, what I'm saying here is that you got a narrative facet. And we're talking essentially about imagery here,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because art, of course, could be in infinite variety of forms,
Mm-hmm.
but narrative versus conceptual. If we
Mm-hmm.
were to go to, so before, I would say, so when I was going to school, right, I graduated Art Center in 1982.
Mm-hmm.
All of us at that time, like, I went to school with Matt Mahurin, and he was one of my best friends, and well, that's a whole a story I can get into, but I did want to mention that we were influenced by a lot of the more recent illustrators of the day, which of course Brad Holland was
Mm-hmm.
one of them, Marshall Ayersman,
Right, right.
John Collier was one of them.
But how? I thought you were right neck and neck with them. They were your mentors, in other words, or?
Well, we were sort of influenced by them, but I was also very much influenced by like the turn of the century art, the symbolists, the pre-Raphaelites.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that time. The pre-Raphaelites had a tendency to be they were kind of narrative, but also conceptual too,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the artist. But the conceptual part, and I have to say, at least in the context of being at Art Center, that's a real pressure cooker, right? Going to that
Oh
school
yeah,
because
yeah.
not only do you have tremendous competition in there, but they're really pushing you hard in the
It's
class.
really hard to come up with a concept when you've got 12 other assignments and you come up with them in your sleep because you don't have time to formulate your homework, right?
But
It's
I will.
intense. Yeah.
But I will say that Phil Hayes, right, who was
Yes.
the department head of illustration at the time,
Mm-hmm.
I think I would actually say that he was one of the people that really pushed this concept of
Mm-hmm.
taking illustration, which for the most part was much more narrative. If you think about the
Right.
golden age of illustration from Andrew Wyeth,
Representational. Yep.
yes, think of Rockwell,
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Wyeth,
Right.
the whole golden age.
Linedecker.
Yes, exactly. For the most part, they're showing scenes,
Mm-hmm.
of a specific event.
Mm-hmm.
It was later that you started to see more of the conceptual elements coming in, and so for us at that time, I'd say Ayersman, Brad Holland was huge.
Mm-hmm. Collier.
Collier. Oh God, I'm playing a blank on some of these other names, but those guys coming out of they were like late 70s,
Mm-hmm.
70s and into the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
That it was like, whoa, these guys are doing something different. And Phil Hayes really pushed that.
That
And
makes sense. Yeah.
and for us being young illustrators, like, okay, well, we're going to do the new thing. But I'll say this much. I'm going to go into just like technique just a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That there was this attitude that I know Matt Mahurin had, that you really need to draw that thing and paint that thing, and you don't cheat. It's a funny thing. You don't cheat by using like a Lucy.
I was
Remember
gonna say
the
how
Lucy?
far we've come, right?
right? The Lucy, or for instance,
Right.
like God forbid you would like you'd project a slide and
Right.
you trace over the top of that, or you would, or even using like a mechanical tool like an airbrush. It's like,
Right.
no, God forbid you don't do it.
Right.
You draw that thing, you paint that thing, you make it real, you make it alive, you tell your story that way.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is,
Well, can I read a quote of yours though on that front? I have a little quote here. I insist on reading
yes.
it because I do. I'll tell you, I've wasted a lot of time feeling like, oh my God, I can't photo bash. God forbid I got to paint the thing, right? And then the whole world has changed. Does that make sense? Like,
Oh yeah, gigantic. I want to talk about this a
okay,
little
okay. So
bit.
let me just read your quote really quick because
Go
I
ahead.
think getting your hands in the clay is a lost art in a way, if that makes sense. And what I love about your work is the sensual, tactile quality, right? It's very much about surface. But you know what? It's also symbolically about seeing through all those layers like etched glass, right? And there's this sort of depth, literal and figurative depth that comes from all that surface activity. So if that makes sense, that is what I love about your work. And I think it is missing, of course, in some digital image
Sure.
making, and it's certainly lost in AI. So I'm just letting you know we need you. And then your quote is, I love the tactile quality of a pencil moving against the surface of paper. It connects my mind with the world of image potentiality. I love that. And that is what AI does too, right? It creates order out of chaos, by the way. Many of my early sketches are indiscernible scribbles and smudged lines, yet slowly they declare their secrets. I fucking love that too. The initial idea is born from those primal marks on paper. Anyway, I had to get that in there. Is that related to what we're talking about a little bit?
That's nice. Did I write that?
You know,
That's pretty funny.
yeah, I think
That's
that was
funny.
you.
Well, okay. I'd like to premise this with, for me, um, what makes great art are three aspects of mind, body, spirit. Mind being the idea and the concept, the body being the materials that you're using, whatever they may be, and then the spirit is your soul essence, your love, your intense passion in the piece.
Mhm.
And when you have those three elements working at a high level of expertise, you reach what I call it um, a transcendence.
Mhm.
You transcend the sum of its parts,
Mhm.
right? And so that ultimately, at the end of the day, that's what I'm looking for. Is whatever materials I'm using,
Mhm.
it's like there's still just materials, whether it's a pencil, whether it's paint, whether it's a Photoshop, or whether it's, in even the world of AI, which I'm not going to get into that right now,
That's
but
another episode, I think.
it's like your personal vision, right? And how you bring your ideas to that when I talk about it being an inside out job,
Mm.
you start from the deepest levels of who you are into your heart, into your brain, into your soul, and bring that to the surface. And when you do that, then you have made a mark. It's a mark of transcendence that is very much connected to you, and it's beyond you at the same time. And if you've really pulled it together, you have that synergy. I call it a synergy of transcendence. It's like this amazing thing happens, and so at that point, I don't care, and you know this to be true. All great art has that. And have you ever noticed, like, you're walking through a museum and you see something? It could be a painting, a sculpture, and it's like it pulls you physically like a magnet to it. And you want to see deeper into it. You want to see the details. You want to touch it in a lot of respects. And that's what you want. It's like you're tapping in deeply to the human condition, but even beyond that.
Right.
So the materials.
Well, I call it inspiration, right? So if we're surrounded by vacuous content all day, every day, and nothing grabs our attention, my premise is like it's actually inspiration that transcends. I like what you said, all those three things align, right? But
Yes.
it's like it came through you because it was inspired by the universe, if that makes sense. So my fear is, and I love this conversation, but my fear is with so much content that is propaganda or campaigning, or it's meant to open your pocketbook, right? Not your heart or your mind. And there's just a lot of content that the public is almost losing its gauge of what constitutes art. What is
Yeah.
artistic integrity or literary value, if that makes sense, or merit? All those are very elitist words, right? But I want to hear later about how you see the future of image making, because I do feel like culturally we are Lucy in the candy shop. You know, we've kind of lost our gauge, and I like what you said, and I hope that people can still sort of be, you know, that art that has the inspiration behind it, that has the right intention, still can compete for attention. Does that
Yes,
make sense?
and well, yes. Today, as we know, once again, you look at history. Today we are bombarded by imagery.
Image saturated society, they say.
I mean, it's like it's gone. It's funny because in the book The Alphabet versus the Goddess, he talks about how literacy really destroyed the image. It was about knocking out the image, and in fact, during those times, um, you're talking back at the very beginning of
Mhm.
literacy, back, thousands, uh, thousands of years ago,
Mhm.
when it started to come up, that there was a battle between the word and image,
Mhm.
and so
Was Protestantism already afoot or no?
that kind of yeah no yeah
Because, you know, the lack of iconography, it would be
he
interesting if that was a product of
oh
it,
yeah
right?
yes oh no it absolutely was it destroyed. There was a battle between image and word,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
word won out after for a long time, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why it created tremendous chaos
Mm-hmm.
throughout society, and the thing is around the planet. But
Mm-hmm.
now what you've seen happen over, I'd say, last few hundred years, when you had the advent of photography,
Yes,
you had
yes.
more painting. Even in the Renaissance, there was this pendulum started to then swing back toward image, and
Mm-hmm.
hence this concept of the goddess returning, which a lot of my personal work is around those concepts.
Mm-hmm.
But um,
And that's
as
where
it's
the
swinging back,
pre-Raphaelite stuff comes in too.
and so what's happening is now it's swung so far back, it may have even gone too
Mm.
far. We'll
Mm.
see, but it definitely we're bombarded, and so I think we do have a tendency to lose sight of what is really important, what has value, and so
Yeah, like images are losing their potency because we're
exactly,
so, yeah.
exactly. It's just everywhere and now also the video, the moving image.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something that there's a still image by itself has its own power, and uh, the idea that you could, for instance, in a museum, like some of these large paintings, that you would go to, and you would just sit in front of them, and they would just tell their story, and they would almost become a meditation into themselves, right? But you're talking before any kind of TV or
Right, right.
that type of thing. That's what people would do.
Mm-hmm.
They would just, it was like their TV.
Right, right.
Now, of course, and that was the power. But now, of
But it
course,
was interactive too, right? Whereas maybe cinema and television is a little less interactive. It doesn't demand as much of you. Is that fair to say?
well, I would say it has more to do with an element of time and how you're focusing your attention. Because, to sit in front of, say it's a large paint, say, I say church, did all the large landscape paintings.
Mm-hmm.
Some, what the
Edward Church? No.
yeah, oh God, I'm pulling a blank on his first name. He's in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. He's all over the place, but he would go to these different countries, do sketches, come back, and he'd make these massive paintings. And
Mm-hmm.
then they would have these openings where they would unveil the painting. People would pay to go in to see the painting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a fascinating idea that you would charge for somebody to come in to see the painting.
Right,
And
right.
they sit down and they would just look
Mm-hmm.
at this piece. It was like a theater. Um, and but the idea that you could do that, and just with the still image, there was something really profound about that.
Mm-hmm.
But now, because of the bombardment of so
Mm-hmm.
much stuff, this I mean, it might be nice to bring that concept back again, but
Well,
it's like
if
a
I could,
meditation.
yeah, I think that we have cultural ADD, and you could argue that like the quick editing of MTV. I remember when that first came along, people were
Yes, yes,
shocked.
yes, I recall.
And then it's been an arc toward like, oh, you got to have a ticker running at the bottom and a pop-up ad, and literally, you go online and it's everything is competing for your attention. So I think it's been a steady arc toward bombardment, like sensory, right, of sensory stimuli. Whereas, yeah, single image, and if you can just sort of meditate on it, it transports you to a very different place. So, do you see us returning some potency? Does that make sense to stillness, or is it just going to be more and more bombardment?
Well, right now, as we know, it seems to me that it's advertising is running the show. So much of the money is
Mm,
in that area. And if you think about it, just in general, it's like this is what any of the social media that we have going on. Ultimately, even you go back to newspapers, right? It's always the advertisers that were running the show. And
right,
this is
right.
why people don't realize.
But it's also people are more consumerist than ever. That's why I say the public are losing their gauge. It's really not content creators that are destroying our capacity right, to meditate on an image. It's the suckers out there that are more consumerist than ever.
Yeah,
So
but you have to understand that where it's the money that's the
of
driver.
course,
So
of
for
course.
instance, in advertising, and this actually goes back a little bit to my career. So, I chose to focus on editorial illustration because I always felt that there was the human element there, that there was that I was somehow I did a lot of social political commentary early on, and I always felt that a lot of dark stuff also, like looking at a lot of the wounds of humanity.
Mhm.
But I always felt like this was the first step to healing. And
Yes.
so even though those jobs didn't pay near as much as advertising, I always felt that to just create an image to sell a product was kind of empty. My heart wasn't into it. I
I
felt
call it
more
rendering water droplets on fruit. That was
Oh no!
the
And in fact, my horror story of my career was one $5,000 strawberry. Believe it or not, where it turned into that type of thing. It's like, oh yeah, no, we want you to do your Spalenka painting, and at the end of the day, it was ended up a horror of a job because it was like it turned out to be this photographic
That's awesome.
piece of a strawberry. It's like, why did you hire me?
Right,
But
right.
but yeah, so I made a conscious decision because I felt that it was connected to my heart and I knew that that would sustain me longer. And I just loved it. I felt it was important. For me, it was art with purpose.
Mm,
But I could have made a hell of a lot more money just
right, right.
doing $5,000 strawberries. It would have eaten my soul away. But,
Right. Yeah.
but the thing is, the advertisers are the driver. And if you think about even with all the magazines and newspapers, and I think of all the publishers, it's the advertisers that were running the show. And today it's 100 times worse. This gets a little bit into the sort of the political facets of how those industries are run. But I worked for all the large publishers, as you said,
Yes, yes.
from the New York Times to Washington Post, LA Times, all the biggest newspapers in the United States, all the biggest magazines, all the biggest publishers. And I can tell you right now, even back then in the 80s when I was doing that, the lies
Mm,
I saw firsthand when I would, for instance, do portraits of people, and on the cover, they would they were being vilified on the cover of
mm.
on the front page of the New York Times, and when I had to do their portrait, and I was asking them, I said, "So what was that all about?" And they said that was a complete fabrication. They said that was a complete lie, and
Wow.
it's like, "What?" I'm going New
So
York Times. I'm
Hillary
going New
did
York
not
Times.
have an alien baby?
I'm telling you. Yeah, well, beyond that, I mean, it's all about agenda. It was back then, but now it's worse because all of these companies, there's a handful of conglomerates that own all the newspapers. They've all been
Yep.
taken over. As magazines, same thing, like Rolling Stone.
Well,
But the thing is,
if you
people
look
don't
at
know this.
journalism, sorry to interrupt you. If you look at
Yeah.
journalism, the arc that I saw was even in, I was again 10 years younger than you, born in 68. And I do remember a day when actually you checked your facts, right? You didn't have to be the first one to publish the story to beat, right, whatever, the other news organization to the punch. You actually had what's called self-regulation, ethics, right? And
There were
also
some,
there was still the guise, at least the guise of unbiased reporting,
right,
objectivity.
right.
I think with as much as I prefer CNN over the other options, right? CNN started it. Then you had MSNBC further left. Then you had Fox News as the answer to that. Then you had Al
Yeah.
Jazeera. And so the
Yes.
truth is out there somewhere. But you know what? Everybody has a daddy. And it's actually
Exactly.
getting worse. But I blame
It's
CNN.
much
I hate to
worse.
say it.
No, it's much worse, and it's tragic, and I'm really sad. It's sad for me to see it because, like I think in the New York Times, in the past when I was working for it, it's like they would fuck up sometimes on purpose, right? Because they had their
Mm,
agendas then too. And you're talking about, you go back, it's from the advent of newspapers,
mhm.
advertisers and agendas by whether it's government or just the paper itself and the people that own the paper. But now it's, like I said, it's 100 times worse. And in fact, it's I can't believe anything that's in those anymore. It's like
Well, and then you
I
have
have to
really
do the research. I
you
have to
have
do the
really
research.
dark rabbit holes now too, where conspiracy theories run amok. So
Yeah, well,
right.
there's a thing you would think. Well, so that's the benefit and the as you said the
The bane of the
the
internet.
bang, yes, exactly. Is that it open,
I
like
call
for
it.
instance, like this podcast, right? It's like this would have never been possible, say like 20 years ago, right? It's
Right.
like this did not non-existent, but
Mhm.
all of a sudden it's here, and
Well, how
now you
about
have
this?
people's opinions.
The truth is out there, but the burden is now on the consumer to watch Al Jazeera and MSNBC and Fox
Yes,
News and then cobble it together. And somewhere in there lies the truth. And then stop
or
smoking pot, and you won't buy every conspiracy theory and every rabbit hole online. You know,
exactly. Well, I tell people more and more, everybody's, so much of it is just opinion. 99% of it is opinion. It's
well,
like, I
life.
don't, yes. And it's like, well, I like to say, perception is an act of creation. And that
Mm-hmm.
our view of reality is based upon our experiences and the biases with which we see the world.
Yep, of
And
course. It's like a
and
lens. You wear a lens.
so sometimes you can have the truth right in front of you,
Hmm.
and it will not be, you're not going to see it, or you're not going to believe it because it doesn't fit your paradigm.
Yep.
I mean, I have to tell you, my parents, right? So I my parents were very conservative and very Republican, and I was always very more liberal. You want to say Democratic or whatever, but and I would go home. I was living in New York, working on for all these magazines and publications, and they would come back and they just go, "Oh, the liberal, all
Right.
they got,
Right.
all the media,
Libtards,
yeah, all the
bleeding heart
media."
liberals. Sorry.
Media is all liberal, and in fact, they lived in they moved to Mission Viejo. I like to say behind the orange curtain, and
Right, right.
they would get the registered newspaper, which, in my opinion, from my experience from working with all these magazines and newspapers, I had a pretty good sense as to where different publications were in the context of right to left or liberal
Mm,
or conservative or whatever. I had pretty, because I was working for all of them. And it was fascinating. I'd get an article, the same article from a conservative newspaper and
mm,
liberal, the same one, and they'd want me to then skew it to be
mm.
more liberal or more conservative. And in either case, I would tell my parents, I would say, hey, actually media is not generally liberal.
Right,
Or
right.
it's more conservative, and
Oh,
it's because it's about money and advertisers. And they said, "Oh, no, no." I said, "Hey," I work for, and it's my parents. I said,
mm,
I work for all these. I've done pieces for all these,
mm.
even Orange County Register. I did work for them, and they go, "Oh, no, no, no." no, Rush Limbaugh tells the truth.
Right.
And even now the Orange County Register is getting more
Right.
liberal. And I going, oh no, you don't. And so it didn't matter what I said. It did. My experience meant nothing. It's my
Right.
parents, right? And so I thought, okay, you know what? To keep the peace, I just cannot talk about this. Well, and so I stopped that conversation.
Good call. Good
And it helped.
call.
It helped a lot. I just,
I
I'm gonna
call it an
focus.
intervention. I had a friend who's, we all live in a bubble to a degree, right? But,
Right.
our parents can sometimes leave the TV on, all of our parents, and just take
All the
in
time.
Fox News all day, every
Oh
day.
my God.
And I had a
Yes.
friend who was like, I just had to shut the TV off. It's called an intervention.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the same time, like that's why I go back to that perception is an act of creation. They
Right.
had their view of reality. And it's
Mhm.
like no matter what I said, no matter what my experience, whatever facts, it didn't matter. It was irrelevant. And I think this is just one of the challenges of being human on planet Earth.
Mhm.
And this is why more and more I suggest to people, if you want to know the truth of something, you need to go get as close to the source as possible. So don't go give me opinions. I don't care on any of them. You want to say Biden or Trump? I'm getting into political aspects there. I don't care.
Mm.
Go talk to them then, or go talk to the people that are close to them, or get as close to them so you can find out where they live. I don't want to. Don't tell me. Don't parrot information that's coming to me
Mhm.
from some other article or somebody else's opinion, because that tells me nothing about. I'm not getting any closer to the truth. So I say go out, but the challenge, as we know, is it's so hard. Everybody's just making a living these days, trying to pay their bills. That it's hard for them to do that.
Mhm.
To go out and to do the extra effort. And most people are too damn lazy.
Well, yeah, I'm not going to disagree with that, but I also think that there's a short-sightedness. I think even when it comes to, oh, I vote for the lesser of evils, and they're all corrupt. I'm sorry, there are plenty of politicians who are very earnestly devoting their
Sure.
lives and getting up off
Yeah.
their ass and doing more than you
Yeah.
or I have ever done to change policy or to
This is
enforce
true.
social evolution. And so I don't buy that thing of, oh, they're all corrupt. It's like, sure, they might become corrupt and have
Right.
earmarks and have lobbyists and succumb to lobbyists, or maybe they have a lifestyle to uphold. It does happen. But within reason, I don't know. I guess I was just saying that you got to tune out the noise, and
Yeah. Absolutely.
that when you just say, oh, I'm worried about keeping a roof over heads and food on the table, and I don't care about social issues. A lot of our societal ills would heal themselves if we had a broader view and stopped
Mm-hmm.
just worrying about the economy
Yeah.
and started paying attention to the social issues. Does that make any
Sure.
sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I like to consider myself the eternal optimist.
Mhm.
And so I'm a firm believer in the goodness of people because I believe that there is an eternal soul, spirit that's a driver underneath everything. And in spite of however if it's covered up with, whatever's going on with the individual, I think in general, people want to do the right thing. They're
Mhm.
trying to be helpful. Sometimes they get completely lost. Sometimes they're mentally challenged, with different, like I have a brother that's schizophrenic,
Mhm.
and for decades, we've all tried to help him, my parents and everything. And we can't reach him, you
Wow,
know.
I
Yeah.
remember you talking about him now. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so and he's living in LA. He's existing and surviving somehow in there, but you cannot have a just a normal conversation. So I just send him love and light as much as I
Mm,
can. But there are some people that are just in that condition. I would say
right.
not most are not that
Mm,
deep into psychosis, but yeah, we could argue that this whole reality is like a dream, and depending on how you want to look at it from a astrophysicist
mm.
standpoint, it's all energy, right? That it's
Yes, of
all just
course.
bits and
Yeah.
pieces. That piece of wood that you think is solid is actually just you know protons and neutrons, and
Yes. It
how
depends
far, how deep.
Yeah, it depends how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go. But
Yeah.
you're everything. I hate to say it, but you're reading from my book, so
You
that's what
hate
it's
to
all
say
about.
it.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. Is really when we say an awareness of story, when we say the vastness of story, right? That's what I'm talking about. Is we do create our reality. We were talking about living in bubbles a moment ago, right? And so I would just call that confirmation bias. When your parents couldn't shift their view of things, it's like the alternative is cherry picking your facts, right?
Yes.
Applying
Yes.
confirmation
Yes.
bias to dig your heels in even further. But
Yep.
on a real, then you take a step back, and I'm agreeing with you. If you look at cell biology and connect that with quantum mechanics, with the law of attraction, like we are creating our reality in a very real empirical way, actually, because our
Yes.
apparatus, our sense organs are taking in the data, but they're actually being reified, right? Reified in a very different way than a dolphin who would use sonar, very different than a spider
Mhm.
who would use 1,000 eyes to do it. And you know what I'm saying. So the field of pure potential is being reified into one reality of many. Did you ever see
Absolutely.
What the Bleep
Yeah.
out of curiosity?
Yes.
Yeah,
A long time ago.
but we
Mhm.
forget. Do you know what I mean? We're all just trying to function here. So we forget all the ways in which we create our own reality, right?
Well,
Yeah.
if you look at the deeper spiritual, for instance, saints and sages, especially in a lot of Indian philosophies, talks about the illusion, right?
Mhm.
Maya,
Right,
Maya
right,
being
right.
being that there
Hmm.
is a force, from spirit that creates reality. But
Hmm.
it's like a dream, and Maya's job is
Hmm.
to show you that they think that this is real,
Yes.
that death, when you die, I mean, that's it, that this reality is it, man. And so your pain, your struggles, whatever is happening around you is real, and that's all you need to care about.
Mhm.
But when you go deeper, and if you can spend some time with however that's whatever that spiritual practice is for you, where you can go beyond the mind and beyond the Maya, then you begin to realize that there, and I know because you're a meditator, right?
Mhm.
You tap into those deeper sources of knowledge and wisdom,
Mhm.
and it's like the windows. What is it? Blake said the windows of perception
Mhm.
open. Yes, it's
Mhm.
the that third eye. Those other dimensions that are there that you have access to, but we're never taught these things,
Mhm.
and so we
Culturally,
don't.
yeah, yeah.
No, yeah,
We're all
it's
about, well,
always
yeah.
on the surface. We're living on the surface of things, whether it's paying the bills, or it's like, that steak I want to eat, or there's that drug I want, or whatever it is,
Well, I
right?
think it's very fashionable as well. So I loved hearing you say, not to put words in your mouth, but it seems like Catholicism is in your blood from a very young age, but it became a personal spirituality as a core component of your personality, not institutionalized religion. But it explains so much. There's Catholic imagery in my work as well, because I actually now love ritual, right? And I love symbolism and iconography and all of that. But I guess my point is, like, I do think it's very fashionable to throw out Virginia, you've heard me say this, throw out the spiritual baby with, I'm sorry, yeah, the institutionalized religion bathwater. So, do you know what I mean? People think they're being smart and savvy by saying, oh, I'm agnostic, I'm an atheist. But something goes out with the bathwater. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it may have taken hold with empiricism, with this idea that science and faith are mutually exclusive when actually they didn't used to be. The church was at the forefront of investigating the true nature of the metaphysical universe, if that makes sense. So you were talking about a kind of language being a major shift to left brain, I believe. And maybe it's all connected, if that makes sense. Like when empiricism took hold of the public imagination, you started beheading people, right? And executing Copernicus and things like that, because it
Hmm.
was not in step with the status quo that the Catholic Church was enforcing. So I think it's been a steady arc, if that makes sense. And now the way I put it is there's a very good reason to be disillusioned with, yes, institutionalized religion. A lot of bloodbaths, right? From what, the conquistadors to the Crusades, a lot of bloodbaths in the name of religion. Yes, it was a fucked up way of using the word, right? Usurping the word itself. And then you add to that, like, oh, all these molestations. There's a lot of very good reason to turn your back on religion. But I see it as being connected. It's so fashionable to be empirical. People will say, oh, that's not scientific. They don't even really know what they're saying when they say scientific. I call it empiricism. Even in the scientific community, scientists acknowledge it's still consensus in the end. For your findings to be canonized, for your findings to be published, your peers have to approve it. That's called consensus.
Yeah, consensus, and of course, but you still ask questions, even when you have consensus. True science is about asking questions. I'll say this much too. You're familiar with Joseph Campbell, yes?
Of course, yes.
And so there's a great book that he wrote called The Masks of God.
Yes, of course.
You ever read that?
Yeah,
it's and what I love about that,
recommend it every week on this podcast.
Oh, excellent. Well, what I love about the title of that book, and of course a lot of his concepts, which are really all about that, the myths and the stories that have been told throughout history, are trying to somehow explain what is happening here in this reality and beyond. But I love the title, The Masks of God, because he says that all the masks, right, are the stories, they are the religions, they're these facets that are representing something, right? They're telling their story, or what they want you to believe. But it is until you pierce the mask that you reach the true mystery. And to me, this is where I feel that I think that's genius, because I do believe there's a truth in that all the religions, he says, and he said, well, that last little part here is that he says the tragedy, like what's happening in the Middle East and most religious wars throughout history, is that all these religions, and when you get to the core, when you remove all the dogma and you get to the core of what they truly are about, they're all saying the same thing. Right. They're all after the same thing. Right. It's the same point of source, but they get caught on
we
the
split hairs. We get
you get caught on the
semantics.
and the exteriors of the words, or the way that the intellect may feel that the concept, how the concept needs to be explained, or but so this is why I think art can be so powerful, and in its symbolism, there's sort of an ambiguity in that. And if you're able to create a piece of art or an image or whatever, however you're doing it, where it can get people thinking a little bit, to dive into the subconscious, where the subconscious, as you know, it's like the guards come down, right? The shields come down. If you can pierce beyond that left brain and somehow make that right turn into the right brain, then we've done our job.
Beautiful.
Especially if you're attempting to touch a deeper part of the being, of the human condition. That's the power in art at the end of the day, and I think in story also.
Well, but I'm so glad you said that, and that really resonates, because one of my questions for you was, my book was originally going to be called Word and Image, Language of the Soul. But really, word and image together are story. But yes, they touch you in very different ways. So one of my prompts that I was going to ask you was exactly that. And I would say image circumvents cognition in a way, cuts to the core viscerally, and not just, with story, you always hear, oh, it's got to have a relatable character. It's got to speak of the human condition. I would argue that story literally is the handbook for how to navigate life in the physical realm as an expression of consciousness, if that makes sense. Like how to navigate your expression in the physical realm. So you just said exactly what I was hoping you would say. I was going to prompt you and say, what is the power of image as opposed to word, if that makes sense? So I from what you said, I got like it actually bypasses cognition and it can be more powerful. I think there's a reason, they say images speak louder than words.
Yes, that's true in a lot of respects. But it's funny how illustration, right, is about
Mm.
illustrating the word, which is kind of funny unto
That's why I
itself.
initially wanted you to define conceptual, because I do feel like we're kind of all over the place in a really good way. I think this will be really inspiring for listeners. But I had wanted to kind of start out a little more linear and by defining concept, which I think we've done, right, eventually. But the way I remember it really being pounded into our heads, I'm being facetious. Thank God it was, because it changed the trajectory of my image making and my
Mhm.
storytelling. But I do remember in those classes, like literally illustration 101 or whatever it was called, intro to illustration, they would say,
Yeah.
avoid narrative at all costs or we'll chop off your hand.
Oh, really?
I'm kidding. That's what those are my words. Like you avoided a narrative situation at all costs. It could be figural, it could be figurative, it could be representational, but the way it was put was like, don't show, I don't know, the standoff between the two heads of state. Show the mice on the floor having a standoff, or show the shadow on the wall, or show the moment before or the moment after. So, do you remember the assignment where you had to depict two people from history or fictional characters without showing them? Right. So,
Oh,
I did like Samson and Delilah, and it was like a pair of
did I
scissors
do
and
that?
a.
Did I give that
Yeah, I don't think that was
assignment?
your
Oh,
class,
okay.
but I think a lot of them, if anybody
Sounds like
that
something. Sounds like something I would have given as an assignment.
well, I think anyone that taught intro to illustration was probably told by Phil to do the fortune cookie assignment, if you
Oh,
remember
yes,
that.
yes,
And
yes. That was
it was
great.
similar to that. And it was
Right.
intro to illustration. But I did,
Mhm.
for Samson, I did a lock of hair and scissors.
Oh,
And
perfect.
well, I was
That's great.
19. My
That's
conceptual
good.
skills were horrible.
No, that's excellent.
Nah, because my Tarzan one was even worse. It was like a pith helmet with a pink bow for Jane, and then like a loincloth
That's
or
funny.
something. That was lame. But I I eventually grasped concept, trust me. But for our listeners, I was just hoping to lay out what is a conceptual approach to image making versus just kind of relying on the narrative as a laziness, I guess. I mean, do you have anything more to say
Well,
about
well,
concept? Because it seems the power of an image seems to lie in the symbolism, the concept, if that makes sense.
yes. Well, I think the obvious is the narrative, and in fact, it's interesting because culturally, right, that can also be an element that comes into play in the context
Mhm.
of how they understand imagery. So, for instance, to give you an example, I'm working on an I Ching deck right
It's
now
beautiful, beautiful.
with
Yes.
it's 64 cards. It's an I Ching Oracle deck with
I love everything I've seen. Yes,
oh, thank you, with Mei Jean Lee.
beautiful.
She is an I Ching master, Feng Shui master, Chinese, and through different connections we hooked up, and then I'm doing these pieces for her.
Mhm.
And she has a tendency, because of her culture, to be much more literal in the
Mhm.
context of how
Mhm.
she creates, how she wants images. She's is the I Ching master. She understands it inside and out from a written standpoint, from the concepts. But then it's my job to bring in the image. And the thing is, I don't want to be just narrative, or to be literal
Right. Of course. Right.
representation. And so we have these I don't want to say they're fights, I'll just say they're intense discussions
Right.
where it's back and forth. I mean, we've gotten halfway through. I thought it was going to go very simple. I thought it was going to be incredibly simple. I was just going to bang these out. It's like, there it is. It's all done. It's like months later.
Oh
And
my
I'm
God.
like, I know both of us are pulling our hair out, but I think part of it is because there's a cultural
Of course.
facet, and
Yes.
she's seeing the I Ching this way through her lens.
Mhm.
And then I, as
But they're not
myself,
mutual. How about this? Narrative and conceptual are not mutually exclusive. So in entertainment, I've had to fight this battle too, where actually, and I taught at Art Center for over 20 years,
yes.
maybe 25 years. And so the drill, like when you're looking at the work on the walls for scholarship review, and that phenomenon of minions, and the stuff that's going to make it in the gallery, right, is going to be the stuff promoted by, I don't know, an instructor who wants minions, right, to reflect their influence. And there's all these, rote institutions in place, right? But the work that regularly jumps off the wall during scholarship review is the merging of narrative and conceptual, right? Where you're not afraid to
Sure.
show figure characters interacting in an environment, because was demonized when I was there in favor of
Oh,
concept.
that's
So in
sure.
entertainment, you know what? You got to go from a storyboard. You've got to show those
Yes,
characters
exactly.
interacting.
Yes,
But what
yes.
if that little stained glass window just, oops, accidentally happened to be right behind her head, so that subliminally you're
Right.
suggesting she is divinity?
Yes,
And
yeah, absolutely.
so isn't it the merging of both that can be powerful? Both the conceptual and the narrative, if that makes
Oh,
sense?
sure. Well, form follows function, right?
Mm,
If you want to look at it that way, form follows function. So, yeah, in a film, now granted, depending on the type of film it is, if it's an art film, you can do whatever you want. But yes,
mhm.
if it's going to be like your typical motion picture, generally there's going to be a story and a story arc, and the character is going to have their arcs, and there's a whole template,
Right,
right,
right.
that's used over and over for that medium.
Yeah.
When it comes to like an I Ching card or an illustration in a magazine or something, it can be a totally different thing. But it's always an interesting journey, and when you collaborate, and that's the thing that's amazing about film in general. It's amazing that any film gets done. I mean, seriously,
You're,
finished.
dude,
And
you're
if,
talking to a filmmaker.
and in fact, I remember I was having a great talk with Matt Mahurin about
Mhm.
this, and he said, essentially, creating a film is like a controlled train wreck. He goes, "Oh, you just pray that it's going to
Right.
be on halfway on the track by the time you're done with it."
Well, because it's collaborative, right? You hear
Exactly.
about creative differences.
Yes.
I would be great to make a film in my shower without involving anybody else, but you know what? It's collaborative by nature.
Exactly. And so that the more cooks in the kitchen, the more
Right.
difficult. And I've
Right.
worked on enough films to see it all.
Well, that leads to a question. I really do have two questions that I'm dying to ask, and this is the perfect transition, also to bring it to a close. But
Yeah.
you have, I mean, more than anyone, really. I think you went from print, conceptual editorial illustration, which is obviously print, but then you transitioned into entertainment. The sensibility is very different. So, what's the biggest arc, I would say, in your own work? Have you evolved as an image maker, not a storyteller, but an image maker through transitioning into cinema, if that makes sense?
Well, I
How has your
did.
work evolved? How has your work evolved over the years?
Well, also, I'll say this much from the very beginning, I've been involved. I've enjoyed a lot of things. I, as a kid, I was in always making art, right? I don't know if you knew this, but I was also a musician. In fact, I had my
I
first,
do know that. I have
I
visions of Vespertina right here.
well, yeah, but even before that, I learned how to play the drums when I was in fourth grade.
Mhm.
I had a paper route to buy my own drum set, like in fifth grade, and then I started had my own rock band in sixth grade. In fact,
Oh man, did not
we were
know that.
called Electric Fire, and we played.
Did you play the Blah Blah Cafe? Remember the Blah Blah?
No, well, we played. Well, let me see. We played for the sixth grade talent show. Two songs, All My Lovin' and Both Sides Now.
Nice.
But then, and I had music in my soul from very
Mm,
early, from probably lifetimes of that. But then at some point I had to make a decision. Am I going to be a musician or am I going to be an artist? And then I chose art, which I think was the right decision. But then now I fuse all those, I fuse those things. I'm doing projects all the time where I'm fusing music and
mm,
art.
mhm.
And so the moving into film that happened because Barry Jackson, who was, are you familiar with Barry
Oh yeah,
Jackson?
yeah. I
Yes.
worked with them. We were instructors at the same time.
Oh,
I think
okay,
he's
great.
still there actually at Art
So
Center.
Barry started out as an illustrator, then he moved into film, and he worked. Probably his first big break was with Cool World.
Hmm. Right.
But I was friends with him, and I would look at all these productions he was working on, and I kept saying, "Damn!" I mean, it's interesting because the illustrator is sort of a solitary exploit. You're doing your own thing. You're working with
Mhm.
the art directors and editors and such. But I'd go to see Barry working on all these different films at these different studios or DreamWorks or private company or private production. And I was always just so impressed, that he'd pull all these this team of artists together to create the vision of how this film was going to look. And I said, hey, you know, if the right film comes around, just let me know. I said, I think it'd be fun to join in on the team just to see what it would be like. And as fate will have it, he then hired me to be a part of the Ant Bully.
Right. I actually
That's
remember that.
started.
You and I were in touch the very first film project you worked on. I did not realize it was Barry Jackson all those years ago.
Oh yeah, and in fact, almost well, not all of the films that I worked on, but
No, but that first one, I do remember we were in touch and you were picking my brain about entertainment, actually.
oh,
But I
well, there
have
you
a
go.
Barry Jackson story. I don't think he would mind me telling this. I think he'd be
No, go
very
ahead.
proud of it. He's such a character. We were at a department meeting, and it's a diversity and inclusion meeting, right? And that's really taken over academia, by the way. And so they were just
Oh,
talking about microaggressions. And he literally stands up and goes, "What the fuck is a microaggression?"
that sounds like Barry. I love it. Oh, that's
But he
great.
spoke what was on everybody's mind. Like, I don't know if he's a product of his generation, but it just said it all. What the fuck's a microaggression?
Yeah, it was great. Well, as we know, it's in either case, I learned a lot from being in film. But now, more one of the reasons, one of the benefits of moving to Santa Fe is that it allowed me not only to recalibrate my nervous system, but it recalibrated a bit as to where I wanted to go with my career, which is less, I know, about doing illustration. I'm doing this I Ching gig right now, but and I still have things coming up, you know, here and there. But for the most part, I want to focus on my own personal projects and bring everything that I have loved throughout my life together, you know, to create
Beautiful.
these projects.
Is there music? Are you working on music projects as well?
Yeah, well, they're yes.
Well, isn't the beauty of film actually, when I first, it was soon after leaving Disney, I spent my own money on my first short film and I just wanted to be a filmmaker.
Yes, I recall. I remember.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, every book you read on filmmaking says not to spend your own money. So I broke all the, and I also had everything they say not to do. I had a horse, 60 extras, a baby, everything you're not supposed to have on set. But point is, I think at the time I thought, you know, it engages all the senses. And I just think it's obviously a very persuasive medium. But I specifically thought, yeah, like you, it actually seemed like the culmination of my little brush with music, community theater. You know, my mom was a costumer and a cosmetologist. So just a lot of skill sets came into play. But I think more so it was like, ooh, it engages all the senses. It really has the power to transform us. If you sit there for 90 minutes and you're invested in the want and the need of the protagonist, the example I use is you'll root for Bruce Willis to kill more people. That's how powerful the medium is.
True.
Right? So for good or bad, you really sign up. If you're invested in their want and their need, it goes a long way. So that was kind of my passion for film.
Well, and Nick, also, so if we just look at our careers, if we look at where I look from when I started to now, you know, there was in the beginning, at least in the 80s, 70s, there was this giant push to be a part of industry somehow, some way. So you went to the art school and then you learned specific skill sets, and then you tapped into some sort of an existing industry, whether it's publishing. And for me, when I started off, it was all about becoming the illustrator. And then in the 90s, I saw that shift where it was more moving toward like, oh, I want to be a concept designer or animator. And so it moved away from the publishing facets into more into film. And then all that moved then also into gaming in the 2000s. And then as it's been going, it's been moving more and more into these, I'd say the moving image.
Right.
But that being said, illustration's not dead. But then to take it a step further, the other part, which I feel is vitally important, is to realize that you can create an industry around yourself. And hence, this gets a little bit into the artist's brain facet. I created that company because, and believe it or not, the concept of that came out of going to Comic-Con, to San Diego Comic-Con, for years, for decades. That's a fascinating story in itself, because I first went to it when I was, I entered the science fiction and fantasy art contest when I was in high school. in like 1975 or something. And I won these I created some monster painting, and this is in Orange County. And it won 2 tickets to the San Diego Comic Con, which at that time was in the El Cortez Hotel in this back room. Just like these guys with stacks of comics and really badly made Batman costumes.
Right.
I mean, horrible, right?
No furries or fuzzies or nobody dressed up, right?
Oh yeah, no. It was like I said, it was like I was like, what am I doing here? I don't understand what this thing is. And so then I fast forward to when I had been in New York for 8 years in 1990. Kent Williams, who was my friend, he was saying, you got to come to the San Diego Comic Con. And, of course, comics were really growing up at that point in a big way, because they were integrating painted and drawn conceptual comics, very different than your superhero type comics.
I remember Kent stuff and
Kent
Sienkiewicz.
Sienkiewicz, yes.
Sienkiewicz, love his stuff. Yeah.
And of course, then Dave McKeon. And,
yes.
But he said, come to Comic Con. And I said, oh, no, I've been to Comic Con. I don't know. And he said, no, you got to come. So by that time, then it had changed. Yeah. It had moved to the San Diego Convention Center. And as we know, now it's just so gigantic.
Right.
But it was in that place where I realized, oh my God, there's a whole new art commerce going on here, where it's about the fan. It wasn't about just, even though a lot of these guys were working for the comic industry. They were like Dave McKeon or John J. Muth or George Pratt, Kent Williams. They were doing a lot of their own work. They had their own personal vision that they brought to the stories in these comic books. They were graphic novels, right? And they were amazing. But then you had Dave McKeon, who was like, not only he was doing his graphic design, he was doing the children's book, he was doing his films, he was doing his music, he was doing everything. It was like anything he wanted to do. And then they would make products and they would sell them there. And it was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so it was at that point, it's like my brain just exploded and said, oh, geez, I've been in these industries, but these are all about industries that are around the artists themselves. And then the fans support them. Right. And so hence this concept of artists as brand came out of that. And I thought, you know what? Artists need to know about this entrepreneurial paradigm that's out there that nobody knew about. So I put that educational service together, and it was great. And for a solid decade, I was presenting those workshops at colleges everywhere. And so now I finally created an online version of the workshop. So if anybody's interested, they can go there and sign up and actually take the whole workshop.
I think you only gave us one. Well, you gave us Spalenka.com and then one other link. But yeah, anything you want to provide us, we can put in the episode description.
Yeah.
It was so needed at that time too, right? Because with industry trends sort of changing, and I know when I started at Disney, I had a 4-year contract. It became less and less the case. It was per picture, right? Then a lot more freelancing. And so buoyancy, I call it, right? Just having that buoyancy, but also retaining your own agency and literally the rights to your own. So I think it was so needed. Don't you think they're raised on that shit now? Like, I'll give you one example. I worked for 5 minutes at Nickelodeon. I'm not proud of it, and it didn't last long. But while I was there, they were actually, I was working with 12-year-olds. Let's just be clear. So this Pokemon thing came out where you're supposed to go outside and look for Pokemon. Remember that?
Vaguely.
Anyway, this kind of says it all. Not only were you it was okay to leave your chair and go out and look for Pokemon. You were the odd man out if you didn't do that. So that's the climate. But I know, like, when I was at Disney, you couldn't leak anything, right? You couldn't show work. There was NDAs were really, really enforced.
Yes.
At Nickelodeon, I promise you, when you talk about the fan base being the emphasis now, they wanted their artists to show their work on Instagram well in advance of the release because they're counting on the fan base of each one of their artists. It's like, is the sky green? Up was up, right? Up is down, down is up. It's completely changed.
Yes, it's fascinating. I remember when I was even started out with it, I got a lot of pushback from with that concept because even the title, I call it artist as brand, right?
Mhm.
It's artistasbrand.com. But the the concept, I had fine artist friends that said, Dad, that's ridiculous. I am not a brand.
Right.
Art is not a brand. I said, actually, it is a
Well,
brand.
you need to get comfortable seeing it that way, right? Or you're not going to survive. And it's the same with AI. Like, oh, it's really uncomfortable for people. But like you were saying, even airbrushing was uncomfortable. Even Photoshop was uncomfortable.
Yes.
You got
Well,
to evolve or die at some point.
your brand is your purpose. This is the thing. It's
Mm,
not just people want to just say, "Oh, it's a corporate structure." It's like you're just now sold out. You're sold out. You're not even about your who you are as an artist. It's like no. Your brand is your purpose. And if you even just look at the
mhm,
literal word brand,
mhm,
that's what it pretty much what it means. Is like I am a rancher, right? The
mhm,
brand on the cattle or whatever is like I am a rancher. That's my brand. That's who I am.
mhm.
But that, yeah. So this idea that you would bring the entrepreneurial facet was a bit tough, but slowly and now it's
Well,
everywhere.
when you say it that way, that it's an extension of your voice, your very purpose on this planet, people get it,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Your brand
but
is the culmination of finding your voice, right?
exactly, that's it perfectly. But I'll say this much, this last little part about the concept in that is that essentially we have a school system, an educational system that just pushes you through the grades, right? If you think about it, it's like take those tests, get those grades, get to the next grade, right?
Right,
Take
right.
the test, just get good grades, and then go to the next level. And then you move from they do that through elementary school, you go to junior high, you go to high school, and then of course it's the big push. It's like a big racket, right? A big push to get you into college. And then, of course, so you go into college, and I cannot tell you the amount of whether you're artists or whatever, they come out, they graduate, sometimes with $100,000 loan on their back.
Mhm,
They
mhm,
still don't know what they want to do. Or conversely, so for instance, like in a lot of the art colleges that I was teaching at different art colleges, and I would give these artists brand workshops, but what would come out of there is they would just teach you the skill set, especially when um, in the 90s, 2000s, where they were really pushing like everybody getting into film. It's
mhm,
like learn how to model or learn how to rig
yep.
your characters, learn environmental design, character design, learn these things, and then you're going to get your contract with the studio system. But the problem I was seeing also is like they're all excited, and then they get into Pixar or they get into DreamWorks or whatever, Disney, and then 5 years later they're totally burned out,
Yes,
and
yes.
they don't know why, and they're trying to escape, but they're getting that income,
Mhm,
like a drug.
mhm.
That's every month, and they don't know how to get out of there, and so then they're miserable.
Yep.
And so I thought, well,
Well,
this is not good
yes.
either. So you
Yeah,
need
I mean,
to
I
get
do think, I mean, again, I taught the portfolio class at Art Center for 6 years, and I keep in touch. I'm sure, well, we're still in touch for that matter. I see where my students land and I keep in touch with them and I see how things play out. And yes, inevitably, a lot of them that had more to say in the world, right, that found themselves languishing on production, reach out to me and inevitably try to move from gaming, let's say, to actually feature animation because they imagine it's going to be more satisfying. But
that's
well, I do think there's a lot of niches on production that involve very
sure,
technical skill sets. And if you don't
sure,
have
sure,
something to say in the world, cool, you still get to be part of film, which you
sure.
may have fantasized about as a child, and you get to put food on the table and roofs over heads.
Right,
Amen to
right,
all of it.
right,
But
right.
for those of us with something to say in the world,
Yes,
it
yes.
doesn't behoove you to focus. And trust me, I had a lot of students in I founded the entertainment track at Art Center. And so you get students coming in and they had taken one modeling class and they have a really low poly model for gaming, if that makes sense. And they try to lead with that. And you're like, if you have enough content to justify a section of the portfolio, go for it. But if not, that's coming out. And
Exactly.
so, but I think more importantly, right? I think we're saying the same thing. Like, what about that thumbprint that is your worldview and your emotional imprint and all those intangibles. What about that flair? People, the biggest question I get at the portfolio workshops is what's going to make my work stand out? And I'm like, well, how about getting to know yourself? Like you're saying, know
Yes.
thyself, right?
Know thyself.
Right.
Yes.
And then eventually your skill set is no longer just a craft, it's married with what you have to say in the world.
Absolutely. And
But
in
you can't
fact,
force that arc, is my point. Like some people are meant to do it. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So if it's meant to happen, it'll connect. It'll
but
connect.
I'll say this much. I think knowing having a sense as to who you are, because that's never taught in all the years of education. It's not like, who are you? What do you love doing? You know, what's your passion? As well as learning, reading, writing, and arithmetic, but who are you inside that, number one? And then you can build off of that. And so, for instance, in the Artist's Brand workshop that I put together, we start with what I call it's your heart virtue. Your heart virtue is that part of you that you were born with. It's like innate, it's in your DNA. It's like it's that voice within you that has a strong sense as to what it is you love, certain desires that are there. And when you can then when you understand that, then you can connect your talents,
Yes.
right, and other goals to that. Then it makes perfect sense. So it's like everything.
It's like your core essence. We've talked a lot, thrown around a lot of spiritual terms, but I call it when you quiet mind and ego, only then can you core consciousness, your core essence, whatever it is. But I do think aesthetics follows, right? Whatever we are, whatever our soul is made of, that is our aesthetic. If it's minor chords, it's minor chords. If it's major, it's major.
Yes. You want to be authentic. You want to be true to yourself. And that's why I say, unfortunately, we have an educational system which pretty much drums that out of you.
Right.
It's like, you just learn what you got to learn to make a living. And
what about the Waldorf? Have you explored the Waldorf school?
Oh, yes. Well, yeah, Roxana, her daughter, went from preschool through high school to the Highland Hall Waldorf School.
Are you a fan?
Northridge. Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, it seems to work. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, at least it doesn't squelch their,
No, well, it's about the whole child. And, if you know Rudolf Steiner, work and his writings and his philosophy, he's the one who created it.
Right.
I mean, it's very much about the mind, body, spirit. It's about integrating the whole child, the whole facet of that person. So you're learning from the outside in, but you also are very much connected from the inside out. And hence, that's why those kids that leave that school are generally very well balanced, and it's pretty cool. It's a beautiful.
Yeah, I think education in general might be heading in that direction, at least in terms of the different types of learners and kind of accommodating them all. Maybe public school will not necessarily come around to that degree. Sorry.
Well, when you see schools removing all their athletics or removing all their music or removing all their art programs, you realize that it's not going so much in that direction. But the more we're aware of it, I do believe that we can help inspire that, right? To keep that because it's important.
Of course, it's everything. I mean, I think education, there was value placed on just being a well-rounded human, if that makes sense. And that included the arts. I think it's all, like you said, back to money. If the sports program is going to bring in the money, let's keep that program. Let's cut the arts. So I just think we need to shift back toward, I do think there's a lot of merging of the binary things, including masculine, feminine, left brain, right brain. And so along with that, maybe there will be a more holistic approach to education where eventually we understand it all works together. I'm just the eternal optimist like you, apparently.
Very good. I think it helps keep us sane.
You got to get up in the morning. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, we got to bring this to a close. Virginia, are you still with us?
Of course I am.
I feel like you're napping or something.
No, I've been enjoying all of it. No, not at all. I've been enjoying all of it. And I just think everything you shared, Greg, is just right on point to everything that we've talked about in multiple podcast episodes.
Well, that's why I'm biting my tongue, because it's so inspirational to listen to you. But I always have something to say, like, oh my God, you're speaking my language. You're preaching to the choir. But I tried to bite my tongue. It's beautiful. It's going to be really inspiring for our listeners. And it,
Yeah.
we don't know who identifies as a storyteller, probably a lot of our listeners. But again, there's such a huge difference between image making and the literary realm, for example, that I think it's going to be new territory for a lot of people. I know I cut you off, Virginia. What were you saying about what Greg has
Oh,
beautifully delivered today?
I just think everything that Greg has been, on point, and I just love listening to both your guys' voices because you guys both have great voices.
Oh, really? Oh,
But
no, I think Nick's is much more mature.
More.
Yes. Of course, we could do the operatic version.
Right.
Yes, there you
We'll
go.
do that. That'll be next episode. We'll have you back.
Time.
But no, but going to the spiritual and the holistic, wellness side of things. I mean, everything you guys have covered, especially a lot of the points that you've made, Greg, is right on. Point to everything that I've seen in my studies when we talk about mental health and what it takes to help somebody have that whole body healing within themselves. And art is such an important aspect of it all. I mean, as kids, when we first start off, I mean, our visual outweighs our cognitive out the gate in our development. So yeah.
Beautiful.
Good.
Okay,
Well,
so we
thank
should
you.
not cut the arts in public school. That's what we're saying.
No, never.
No, that's a gigantic, huge mistake. I mean, not only you're dealing with different facets of the brain and
It's
just
inessential. Do you like that word, inessential?
and he's
Well, during the pandemic, you heard essential and inessential. It's like, it's just your priorities, really.
Yeah.
Anyway, all right. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Virginia. This was a pleasure. Yeah, we'll have to do it again. Maybe
I would love to. We didn't reminisce. I'm so tired. We did an episode this morning too. My tongue is tired.
Oh my goodness. Oh, yikes.
We didn't reminisce nearly enough for my taste. So we'll have you back for sure.
Okay, sounds great. Well, pleasure and honor, and wonderful to be reconnecting with you. And I love what you're doing. I think your podcast is vital. It's important. So I bow to your vision, and so continue on.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Yeah, we're really lucky to have you. I'm not just blowing smoke, but you changed the face of pop culture, of culture, and I want to get more into that next time. You are an icon in the illustration field, and it's I don't know. I want to talk a little bit more about your career, basically.
Sure. Yeah, we can get into that. And
next time.
And then if anybody's interested, they can always go to my site, spalenka.com, and they can learn about my different projects. Go to my blog there. I have a Substack also.
You're my screensaver right now. I just made some of those deck images of my screensaver.
Oh, cool.
So beautiful. I mean, that's the part we haven't conveyed. The work just will transport you.
Yeah, we ended up doing sort of the overall view with this one.
Yeah, exactly. Which is,
dive more into the art next time.
That would be great. All right. Thank you so much. And to our listeners, remember, life is story. And we can get our hands in the clay. Individually and collectively, we can write our own story. See you next time.